Naomi.
And my name's Kaylee.
And this is the Eerie Theories podcast.
We're going to talk about true crime, conspiracies, ghosts, and other strange and eerie topics.
Some of this may be NSFW or triggering, since some of our topics can be unsettling or violent. We recommend listening with caution.
Thank you for joining us, and we hope you enjoy the show. To talk about in the beginning. I feel like we should have like a thing.
A thing.
Like how we talked about the Ted Bundy movie last week.
Yeah. We went live today. That's wild.
By the time you'll be listening to this though.
Yeah.
It'll be like a month later.
Yeah.
Still figuring out that podcast life. But
it's
thanks
a
for being
ridiculous.
Here. Yeah.
Honestly, like I didn't know how hard it was to create a podcast until we actually tried it.
Yeah, props to all of you actual real creators out there.
Yeah, and thank you for listening if you are, and hopefully we can get onto more platforms eventually, but right now that's expensive, so we're gonna hold off on that for a sec, and hopefully you can find us on YouTube eventually. We'll start recording and everything.
Yeah, let us know if you want to see our faces.
Yeah, that's gonna be another thing that I'm gonna have to get used to, because my voice is one thing, my face is a whole nother. Like, oof.
Takes me back. So today I wanted to talk about the Texas killing fields. Have you ever heard of that?
I have not. I'm like interested if once you tell me I'll start realizing, but it sounds obscure.
Yeah, this one was a little bit more obscure. I found it on one of those Reddit threads, like, what spooky things do you know of that's near you?
Those are the best.
So this one is a cold case, and this mystery takes place in League City, Texas. It's kind of weird where the land is. It's between a couple of different areas. So it's like a 25-acre stretch, which is like 50 miles. And it's in the Calder Oil Field, about a mile from I-45. So it's right between Houston and the other one.
Dallas?
Not quite that large.
Oh. Like, those are the only ones I know.
I definitely wrote it down. There it is, Galveston, Houston and Galveston. Okay. So, yeah, it's about 50 miles near the Calder Oil Field, so it's just this huge patch of land that's just out in the middle of nowhere, Texas. And this location is known as the Texas Killing Fields, and that was dubbed after the 2011 movie loosely written around it. Mm-hmm. That's what the name of the movie is, and so that's what just got adopted.
The Killing Fields is what it's called?
The Texas Killing Fields.
Okay.
It's got, like, Chloe Grace Moretz in it.
Ooh.
So the Texas Killing Fields is where the bodies of over 30 women have been found, and it's assumed that there are more that haven't been uncovered.
Only women?
Mm-hmm. And they're from the ages of, like, preteen to 30-ish.
Do they look similar or anything?
Somewhat, and we'll get into that.
Okay.
So this takes place in the early 1970s, like usual.
Mm-hmm.
This is when young women and girls began to go missing between Houston and Galveston, Texas. So July of 1971 is when the first victim, 14-year-old Brenda Jones, was found in Galveston Bay near Pelican Island. So you're going to hear a lot of random places. This is such a giant stretch of land that it is kind of different areas where people were buried. And so for almost 10 years after 1971, more girls would go missing and some of their bodies would be found.
Okay.
And then a couple of those murders would be solved. Mm-hmm. But this is where the story kind of got some traction and where it starts to get interesting. So in 1983, a series of 4 murders where the bodies were found near each other in a similar manner, and all 4 had similar features. They were all brunette and they were all white. And it's suspected that they were connected and possibly murdered by the same person, but no one was ever convicted. So the first of those 4 victims to be found in the fields was Heidi Villarreal Fay, and she went missing on October 10th, 1983. Her body was found when a woman was walking her dog, and the dog found Heidi's remains in April of 1984.
I'm sorry, did you say an age that Heidi was?
I believe she was in her 30s.
Okay.
And then the next victim was found in February of 1986. She was found by 4 boys riding dirt bikes in the field.
Uh...
They smelled something really bad, and they went to go investigate. So they called the police, and when they went to collect the body, they named it Jane Doe because they couldn't figure out who it was from a DNA sample. And then they came upon the remains of another girl, 16-year-old Laura Miller, who had gone missing 2 years prior.
What?
So they found her body 2 years later.
Okay, is it just me, or like I'm like kind of hoping that I find a dead body at some point? Like I think
it's just
cool.
you.
Oh, well, I think it'd be kind of cool. It'd be a hell of a story.
I would be really terrified.
Well, yeah, I see dead people plenty.
Oh, that's true. I've only ever seen like one dead body,
Mm-hmm.
and it was like of a family member, and it was just weird. And it was after they had like all of their organs harvested, because they were a donor.
Yeah.
And so like their eyes were closed, but you could tell that like they were gone because they're like sunken in.
Ooh, that's different.
Yeah.
I've seen like fresh dead.
Oh, well, so they still look like people. They just
Yeah.
look like they're sleeping, but
Yeah.
like
Just a little
decaying bodies are creepy.
gray. Yeah,
Because they're shells, and you know that there's not like a person inside anymore.
Oh, you're right. Ooh, but I kind of want to see that. I don't know. Maybe I'll regret it at some point, but
Naomi's just here for the morbid people. So the family of Laura was just devastated, but more than anything, they think that the police didn't do a good enough job on their investigation since she was so easily found next to another body. A lot of these bodies were just laid in the fields, or they were in shallow enough graves that they were just uncovered really easily. So this girl, unfortunately, Laura, she had gone missing, and the parents filed a police report, but since a lot of the times when teenagers go missing, they just say run away.
yeah, it's really a shame that, or like when you're over 18 or 21, it's like, oh, well, you're an adult, so like it doesn't matter, we don't have to look for you.
But since for 10 years, like, these bodies have been turning up in the fields, the family was like, hey, can you go check?
Really?
And they didn't even check for 2 years, and her body was just right there.
Oh my gosh. You'd think that like after finding even like one body, you'd be like, let's check out this area. Like,
Yeah, and like uncover a bunch of them.
yeah.
But this was the 80s, so.
No.
That is the 3 people. We have Heidi, Jane Doe, and then Laura Miller. In 1991, a 4th unidentified body was found, and they named her Janet Doe. Most of the women were treated horribly. Their bodies were found nude and with their arms crossed. Most of them had been raped, then shot, and then left in the fields or buried in shallow graves. And this is pretty true for almost all 30 bodies that have been found. Mm-hmm. A lot of them were just completely mistreated, which unfortunately is pretty common. Mm-hmm. So over the next few years until 1999, over 30 women would go missing. Some of the bodies would turn up, but because of the limited forensic testing, they weren't able to identify all of the bodies. No. So it was like the 70s through the 90s where there wasn't really much you could do. Yeah. The reason they found Laura is because they had the family who was looking for her. They tested for her DNA. They found her through... same thing with Heidi. They found her through dental records because they had been reported as missing people. Mm-hmm. So what happens with these cold cases is over time, it just becomes harder and harder to solve. You have no leads because people can't remember anything anymore. A lot of these people, either their killers have died, their family has died. Like, it just happened so long ago. Like,
witnesses have died too.
Yeah, like there's just nothing you can do, and nobody remembers who they saw at a gas station.
Yeah.
A week ago. Who's gonna remember?
Certain obscure time.
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
Seriously. And that's why a lot of the serial killers and missing cases were so hard, and we have all of these cold cases and DNA things and everything from the 70s and this whole time period. A lot of the girls' cases don't get solved because they don't take it seriously, and they call it a runaway, and they just never investigate. Yeah. And that's what happened to Laura. She just never was investigated. So the fields have been dubbed the perfect place to commit a murder and get away with it.
Wow.
Yeah, so that was in the documentary I watched about it with some of the family members from Laura and some other people involved. Mm-hmm. Which is just kind of an awesome way to describe it, but at the same time very morbid that this whole entire field just exists. Something that they said was if you're standing in the field, you can see I-45 and then you can see the oil fields. But, like, if you were to scream, no one would hear you.
Oh, that's horrifying. I hate that.
Yeah, like, can you imagine just being in the middle of a field and just, it's just empty, no noise around you.
Oh, I hate that. I didn't know that I didn't like that until you said that. Like, oh, no. I don't know how people, like, live in secluded houses even. Like, that's too much.
So for a lot of these murders, it's really weird because a lot of people think that they're somehow connected. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, it's kind of like they also think it could be many serial killers. So one of the investigators on some of these cases he was talking about in the documentary, he was like, you know, what's more scary to think about? That there's one serial killer that has killed like 40 people, or that there's a ton in your neighborhood, like right near you?
I think I'd rather one.
It's a little bit harder to...
eat.
You also don't fit the profile, so...
Oh, don't I?
Because I would definitely be dead in those fields.
Really? Do they all...
They were all, like, brunette and white.
Oh. Yes. Finally. It works out for me.
And that's not true for all of them.
Oh.
It mostly was just, like, a few of them in the 80s and the 90s. It was the 4 linked murders that they all looked like that. But a lot of the other ones, too. So
do they... So you were saying they were all lied down and they were all with their arms crossed and like raped and all that. Do they all match that description?
So just the 4 that happened in 83.
Okay.
A lot of the other ones were nude, and then some of them were shot as well.
Okay.
That's how a lot of them died. A few of them also, they think, have died from strangulation. It was really hard to figure it out because a lot of these bodies weren't found until
they were
months to years after.
Decrepit.
Yeah, so it's kind of hard to test on bodies that old.
Mm-hmm.
Especially if all you find is bones from it being out in the oxygen.
Yeah. Oh, and scavengers and everything.
Mm-hmm. Oh. So it's kind of insane. No, for the ones that haven't been solved, at least, no one ever witnessed any of the murders. Nothing links really any of them together.
30 people?
Yeah, like everything about it is just like shrouded in this mystery and uncertainty because they just know nothing about it. They were like, wow, some of these guns don't even match up to each other. Like, just the weirdest things where it's like, you're not going to get caught because they never found anything. And a lot of it is just because, and this is what some of the people working on the case and some of the families say, is just that the police didn't care. Yeah. And they weren't doing a good enough job to investigate it.
Mm-hmm. Well, you always hear that with murders.
Yeah, with a lot of the cold cases especially. So now we're going to get into some of the suspects. And this one is from the Washington Post article that I read. This one was posted earlier this year, actually. And we'll get into what happened to kind of resurface this case this year. So Tim Miller, the father of the second victim, Laura Miller, he investigated on his own after his daughter was found, since he felt that the police weren't doing a good enough job on any of the other ones. Yeah. So a man named Richard Abel had purchased some land near the Calder Oil Fields, and he had opened a horseback riding business. Because he fit the psychological profile of a killer, the FBI went and stormed his house, and they searched it, but they didn't find any physical evidence or links to any of the women, and none of his gun's ammo matched the bullets found in the women. Okay. So after that, it's kind of like, you can't ask him any more questions. Yeah. They found nothing. Allowed. But it kind of sucked for him. A lot of his life ended up, like all of the people in the area just ended up believing he murdered people, and so people would just drive by his house and be like, murderer! Kind of ruined his life.
That sucks. Especially if he is, like, completely innocent.
And you know what's crazy is, like, we'll probably never know.
Yeah, like, maybe he just threw the gun away, but, like, also, maybe this is just some dude that just wanted some land.
Well, I'm also wondering, like, who did this? Who did murder these women? Like, was it people that live in that area? Was it people who, like, just passing by? Yeah. And you know what's crazy, too, is, a lot of these victims, this was the 70s, they would leave their house and then say, bye, I'm gonna go hitchhike to so-and-so's house. And then they would call from, like, a payphone at a gas station and go missing. People just did the weirdest things. Yeah. They, like, thought they were so safe. Be safe. Don't hitchhike in the middle of Houston, Texas.
I really hope that people know that by now.
I feel like it doesn't happen much anymore. I don't think you hear about hitchhikers very often.
Well, after all this, you know.
So there was another man who actually confessed to the murder of 11 of the girls found in the fields. His name was Edward Howard Bell, but they didn't find any evidence to convict him. He was already a convicted murderer and in prison, so they think he did it just to boost his prison rep.
Oh my gosh.
Just to, like, add bodies to it. I'm like, I already killed one, might as well confess to 11 more.
That just, like, that puts so much unease to the families. So
yeah, it just, like, makes it worse.
Yeah.
So another person, William Lewis Reese, he was convicted in 2015 of 3 of the murders during the late 90s. After he led the police to the bodies. He confessed to a 4th, but they didn't find any evidence to convict him for that one. So they did for the first 3. So
okay. Wait, what evidence did they find for the first 3?
I have no idea. This was just pulled from looking at the victims. Charged in the murders of Tiffany Johnston, she was 19, Jessica Kane, 17, and Laura Smither, 12.
Oh, no.
And then he's suspected but not charged in the death of Kelly Cox, 20. He was already serving a 60-year life sentence for kidnapping when he led police to the remains of Kane and Cox in 2015. And that's just straight from the Wikipedia article.
Yeah.
Because that just has, like, the whole table of everybody that was murdered in the fields that was found.
Mm-hmm.
That's been identified, at least. So all of the rest of them remain a mystery as to, like, who they were and as to who killed them. There's probably more bodies out there.
Mm-hmm.
And as time goes on, it just gets worse and worse and harder to convict somebody because you just don't have any evidence. You don't have a body. You don't have DNA. Like, everything's just missing. It's just gone and lost to time.
Yeah.
Just kind of awful knowing some families will never get any of that.
Mm-hmm. You can only hope that the cops kept some form of evidence, and hopefully they can find, like, genome testing and stuff like that eventually, since like the ancestry.com, that's becoming, like, a big thing. So,
which actually is what happened earlier this year.
Really?
So something that happened because of all of those happening, and they've been solving a lot of those cases from the 70s. So that happened earlier this year in 2019. They haven't convicted anybody new, but what they did find was for those 2 women that were unidentified back in 1983, connected to those 4 murders. They both were identified finally.
Oh, yay.
Yeah, so a DNA sample for 23andMe and, like, all of those other companies for genealogy testing, you basically send in a DNA sample and they know everything about you and your relatives. So even if you don't take a test or consent to it, they also have all of your family members' information and identification, which is how Golden State Killer was caught. A whole bunch of other serial killers from the 70s are getting caught now. A whole bunch of stuff is happening just because, like, your second cousin decided to take this test. You're gonna get convicted.
Yeah. Honestly, good for them.
Yeah, this is awesome.
I don't even know my second cousin. If he's a murderer, like, go for it. Like, convict him.
Which is so funny because it's like everyone's freaking out about consenting to giving police your records, and it's like, don't commit crimes and you have nothing to worry about.
Exactly. I'm like, I haven't murdered someone, so I'm cool. Like, they can have my DNA. Like,
I guess it does suck, though, if you don't consent to it. Like, my brother did it for his birthday. So now they have my whole family.
Yeah, and it's, like, very close DNA then.
Yeah.
So can't get away with anything.
Good thing I've never done anything illegal.
Yet.
But these breakthroughs in technology are really awesome, that police are able to identify bodies and murderers and everything like that. So they took DNA from the bones, because that's pretty much all that's left at this point, is bone DNA, which is really cool because this did not exist back in the day. For forensics, a lot of the DNA was extracted differently, and you had to get a fresh body in order to do it. Otherwise, you were kind of shit out of luck. So this was really cool. They used bone sample DNA. And the company was Family Tree DNA.
I haven't heard about that one.
Me either. I figured it was one of the bigger ones, so... But Jane Doe and Janet Doe, whose bodies were found alongside Heidi and Laura Miller, they were found... So the first woman was found alongside Laura Miller, the one that the boys on the dirt bike found. Yeah. She was 30-year-old Audrey Cook, and she was found in 1986. And then the second was Donna Prudhomme. I hope I said that right. And her body was found in 1991. So this was really cool. They were able to kind of talk to the families, have proper burials for Donna, I know at least. Audrey, I'm not sure if she had any family left to contact. Because you have to remember, sometimes people didn't even file missing persons reports.
Well, they were old enough. It's like they were adults. They could have just left and made their own lives.
Yeah, especially because she was 30, and then Donna, she was also, I think she was 34, and she had a couple of children, but they were living with her grandma at the time.
Okay.
And she had gotten into some drugs or something like that. So they just figured she ran away or something.
Yeah.
It was pretty cool. They were able to identify their bodies after all this time, but that's about it. They can't do anything else about suspects or anything else. All of that evidence has pretty much been gone. All they have is that DNA in the bones. So,
well, at least they get to say goodbye, or anyone that can say goodbye.
Very true. Well, yeah, those are the Texas killing fields.
Yeah, you were right. I have never heard those. That's super cool. It's not okay. No, it's not cool to get murdered, but like, it's crazy that like that much land has that many bodies.
So the latest victim, she was found in 2006.
Oh my god.
Yeah. So like they're still turning up out there.
Why isn't there like a cop like patrolling like
I guess they just don't care. Well, I'm wondering too, because it's in between cities.
Yeah.
So whose is it?
Well, like,
because it says in a couple of them it's a League City, Texas people.
What?
League City, instead of Houston or Galveston.
Oh, so it's like another.
Yeah, it's like another city.
County type thing.
And what's interesting too is all of these bodies are like labeled from where they were found,
yeah.
And they're all in different cities. But they're all within these fields.
Oh, that's crazy. I wonder if, like, jurisdictions and everything like that end up becoming part of it. And that's why they...
And a lot of it was that they were from the areas surrounding it. So, like, a lot of their bodies were just found. And oh, and correction, Heidi was 23.
Oh, no.
And so, the way she was found from the dog brought her skull to her owner. That's how she was.
Oh, that's so badass.
Discovered. I know. All I could think of was like a golden retriever with a skull in his mouth.
That's what I imagined.
Like, good boy.
Like, oh no evidence, but like, nice.
That's so awful.
Yeah. I mean, at least like you know what you're like looking at. Like if it was a femur or something, I'd just be like, oh, you know, like a deer, let me fetch, you know.
Oh my god. I don't think I would do that. I don't think I would touch bones. If it was an animal or not.
You never know.
So we talked about the Texas killing fields, but now I'm going to talk about a little bit of a different kind of murder. So this is the murder of Jeanette De Palma. So this is a cold case that is surrounded in controversy, and this one also takes place in 1972 in Springfield Township, New Jersey, which is a very long town name.
It seems like you like these cold cases.
I do. I enjoy the 70s because it's kind of like, and nobody knows.
Yeah.
But like for the most part, it's just because like no one cared.
Yeah. It's like, it's really sad, but it's like mystical in some like sense.
It's like we didn't have technology, so we have no idea.
Yeah.
She had no cell phone. She left the house. And she died. And that's most of these. Yeah. But yeah, I like the cold cases. I like when they don't go anywhere. And we just get to like pretend and make up theories of our own. Yeah. So the victim is 16-year-old Jeanette De Palma, and she was active in her evangelical church, which will be important later. So on Monday, August 7th, 1972, Jeanette De Palma planned to leave home and take a train to a friend's house, but she would never arrive. After neither the friend nor the family had seen her later that day, Jeanette's parents filed a missing persons report, which, good on you, with the local police.
That's fast. Good.
So 6 weeks later, another puppy, A dog brought one of her decomposing limbs to their owner.
What's with these dogs?
So you correctly predicted that earlier. And Jeanette's body was found on top of a cliff inside Springfield's Hoodale Quarry. Okay. Hoodale?
Hoodale?
Who done it? But a quarry is like a wild area, like a forest or a canyon where there's like cliffs and trees and it's like a hiking area type thing. Normally they're blocked off as like nature areas. So apparently the police investigations were incompetent or they were covering something up, as were the family and friends of Jeanette.
Ooh.
So they had a couple of leads, but the case eventually went cold since none of the leads ever went anywhere. Mm-hmm. So the friends, the family, the police, everybody was just giving different stories, so they can never come up with something real and never connect all of the dots pretty much. So this is from her autopsy, and I just took this right from the Wikipedia article because it was kind of a good explanation of what they did for her. Mm-hmm. So it says, her remains and clothing showed no evidence of bone fractures, bullet wounds, or knife strikes. No drug paraphernalia was found on or around the body. For undisclosed reasons, the coroner suspected that strangulation was the cause of death, leading the Union County Prosecutor's Office to treat the case as an unsolved homicide. The coroner also discovered an unusually high amount of lead in the remains, but no explanation was ever found for this occurrence either. And I never could really find anything else about high levels of lead in the body either and what that could mean.
Yeah, I was gonna ask, I'm like, I wonder if there's like a poisoning or like...
I'm wondering too if like they were just taking some weird supplements in the 70s.
Yeah, true. You're right. It could have just been like a weird vitamin.
Or like how everything was made out of weird stuff, like just by like eating tomato soup out of a tin can that you refrigerated.
Yeah.
Gives you like radiation poisoning or something.
You're right. They like played with mercury like that. Like it could have been anything.
But the autopsy didn't have a conclusive cause of death, and they also never tested any clothes for DNA. So, not great on police part. Yeah. They didn't ever test for anything.
Yeah.
So here's where the controversy and inconsistencies kind of add up. So more and more witnesses were turning up and claiming that her body on the cliff, that around her body on the cliff, they found strange occult objects like wooden crosses, evidence of human sacrifice, and witchcraft. One rumor even suggested her body was found on top of a pentagram. So police and the person who found her, they all deny this.
Okay.
But what's interesting about these weird stories is like they all started popping up all at once. They were all sent in like the late 90s, early 2000s to this magazine called Weird New Jersey. And they were all anonymous, and they all wrote to this magazine, and they all seemed to have it in common that the murder was somehow related to cults or something satanic. So I wanted to read you some of these anonymous accounts that are on here. Mm-hmm. It is strange, but also kind of funny. So, not an altar, but logs around her body. This is in regards to the story of Jeanette De Palma. When her body was found, it was not on an altar. There were logs around her body. She needs to be put at rest finally. I am sure something out there, or someone, must be able to give you some more about the case. Maybe she did herself in, because at the time, there was a lot of Satan stuff going on around the reservation. Sorry I can't give you my name for more reasons than one. So it was near, like this quarry, it was near a reservation. So it was kind of blocked off for nature purposes. And so apparently like a whole bunch of cult stuff was happening at the time. And so all of these people and all of these like anonymous people that wrote in were like, hey, by the way, there's some like witchcraft happening. I was in school with the girl. I think that these witches planned it. Yeah. So this is the next one. The witches planned the killing. I was a young teenager when the discovery of Jeanette De Palma happened and lived in the next town. About 2 years prior, there was much talk in my school about a cult in the surrounding area. They were known as the witches. They must have let it be known in the area that they planned to kill a child on or about Halloween, either by kidnapping and sacrificing them or by poison. I remember being anxious about this because I went trick-or-treating in those days, and I didn't read the newspapers, but I was well aware of the dog that brought home the girl's arm. The story was well known, as I lived within 3 miles of the quarry. So arrows point the way. Apparently my mom knew Jeanette because Jeanette worked at a clothing store in Summit and Seal Funds. They were about the same age, which should have been around 13 or 14. My mother and some of her friends used to hang out at the camp in the quarry. That is, until they found out about the murder. Yeah. My uncle, who was a Summit cop, came to warn my mother against going there any longer. From what I was told, these details were never released to the public. When the dog brought the arm home and the search for the body started, they found the arrows carved into the trees that would lead you to the body. The location was high up on a cliff. All around her body were dead animals tied up to trees with string in some jars. Shortly thereafter, there were reports of animals being mutilated and hung in the same fashion in the Watchung Reservation, which is also very close to the scene of the crime. The Watchung Reservation, or the Res, has been reported to the center of devil worship activity for years. So, there is evidence of cult things happening, but a lot of people just can't believe that there's any link there.
Yeah.
And it's weird, too, because the person who found her doesn't think that there was anything around the body, so I'm wondering where all of these, theories that there was all this stuff around her came from.
It would make it so much more sensational.
Yeah.
But
I highly doubt it.
Yeah.
And there's, a ton more on here. So we'll go ahead and link that in case you want to read any of the rest of them. But they're super strange, and especially because, so many of them wrote in. And they were like, hey, there's some cult shit happening.
That's really cool, though. I'm glad you put in, actual... accounts from them, because I love that type of stuff. I'm like, yes, let me know more.
But I'm also thinking, who just comes up with this?
True.
It has to be, some truth to it, because that's so strange to be so specific like that.
At the very least, it has to have been, rumors at the time or
exactly,
something.
for this to have grown.
Yeah.
Because it was, 20 years before all of these anonymous accounts got written in. It was, people who felt guilty about it in their adult years, and the children of these girls when they were teenagers. So that makes me wonder, maybe it was.
It's also weird, how many people wrote in for, I've never heard of this magazine. And how come all of these people all somehow know something about this murder and they, read this magazine?
So one of the theories, too, is that this weird New Jersey magazine, because all these people wrote in anonymously, is that they just made it up and
just
wrote
one person
for their magazine. So
oh, that sucks.
I know. I wanna believe it, because that just ruins this whole thing. It just means a 14-year-old girl got murdered in the woods.
It she deserves more than just that's it.
Yeah. And so the guy who found her thinks that she OD'd on drugs, but the whole family was she was 14.
Yeah.
What drugs would she have gone into?
Where did she find them, and how did she pay for them?
Seriously. Her whole Wikipedia page is so tiny, too. But they never found really any suspects or anything. They didn't find a cause of death. I'm going to do it right now. I'm going to look up what led in the body during autopsy. So lead in the body could have been due to lead poisoning from air, water, food, any of the contamination stuff.
Okay.
So the witches could have poisoned her with lead, put it in her food or something.
All her supplements.
Right. But yeah, that was the death of Jeanette De Palma.
That'd be really cool if it was again, I don't mean cool murder's cool, but if something sensational happened for this really sad occurrence.
Instead of this just being a very sad cold case. Yeah.
Just another girl getting murdered.
For sure.
Thank you so much for listening to the Eerie Theories podcast.
If you want to hear more of us, go ahead and subscribe so you never miss an episode. Also, give us a follow on Twitter at Eerie_theory and let us know what topics you'd like to hear on our show.
We'll see you next time on Eerie Theories.